Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip into something a little less comfortable. We're traveling back to the 19th century, into the world of silk, lace, and a fashion statement so extreme it literally rearranged a woman's insides. You're about to become a Victorian lady, and spoiler alert, achieving that perfect waist-waisted silhouette is a full-time job with some seriously gnarly health consequences. Honestly, you might just faint on your first day, and that would be considered perfectly normal, even fashionable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I always love to know where you're all listening from. Drop me a comment with your city and what time it is for you right now. It's always cool to see this little community stretching across different time zones. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air in the drawing room is thick with the scent of beeswax polish and dried lavender. Sunlight filtered through heavy velvet curtains falls in dusty stripes across the floral Axminster carpet. You're sitting, not quite comfortably. Ladies never slouch on a stiff-backed settee. A copy of the Englishwoman's Domestic Magazine resting in your lap. You aren't really reading the articles on household management or the serialized romance. Your attention is captured completely and utterly by the fashion plates. There she is, the ideal. A woman drawn not as flesh and blood, but as a perfect, curving silhouette. Her shoulders are sloped and delicate, her bust prominent, and her hips swell out in a graceful bell shape. But it's the space between the waist that holds your gaze. It is impossibly, breathtakingly tiny. It's a wasp waist, an hourglass figure so extreme it seems to defy the very laws of anatomy. The caption beneath describes her walking dress in loving detail: the silk, the taffeta, the intricate jet beading, but the dress is merely a vessel. The true masterpiece is the shape it's stretched over. This isn't just an image in a magazine. It's a promise. You see this same shape gliding through the parks, stepping out of carriages, and presiding over tea tables. It's the shape of wealth, of refinement. A waist that small whispers a story to the world. It says, I do not perform manual labor. I do not scrub floors or carry heavy buckets. I am an ornament, a symbol of my husband's or father's success. This, here, is the era's most crucial mainstream knowledge point. The corset-induced silhouette wasn't just about beauty. It was a public declaration of social class. A working-class woman, by necessity, had a sturdier, more natural frame. A lady was a delicate creature, molded into an artificial ideal. You trace the outline of the woman in the magazine with your finger. Your own waist, beneath your current, moderately laced morning bodice, feels thick and undefined by comparison. Your mother's voice echoes in your memory, a gentle but firm reminder of what is expected. A straight posture, my dear, and a controlled figure. It speaks of a controlled mind and a virtuous character. A fashionatedly strange and less talked about belief of the time, the idea that physical constriction was linked to moral purity. A loose waist, in the minds of many, implied loose morals. To be tightly, even painfully, bound was to be seen as respectable, disciplined, and chaste. Your body becomes a physical manifestation of your inner virtue. But, as you look closer at the drawings, a small, modern part of your brain can't help but ask, was this real? Did everyone truly look like this? The truth is, these fashion plates were the 19th century version of an Instagram filter. They were an exaggeration, an ideal pushed to its absolute limit. Historians to this day argue about just how common the most extreme examples of tight lacing actually were. While almost every middle and upper class woman wore a corset, the quest for a 16 or 18-inch waist was likely the pursuit of a dedicated and often criticized minority. For most, the goal was to create a smooth, fashionable line under their clothing, not necessarily to shrink themselves to the size of a doll. The debate continues whether these images are a reflection of a widespread reality or a form of aspirational fantasy that only a few zealots attempted to fully embody. For you, though, sitting in this quiet room, the distinction hardly matters. The ideal has been presented. The promise of elegance, status, and virtue is intoxicating. The image in the magazine isn't just a suggestion, it feels like an instruction manual for womanhood. You close the magazine with a soft snap, the sound echoing slightly in the stillness of the room. The decision has solidified in your mind, a quiet but firm resolution. It's time to move beyond the gentle bodices of your youth. It's time to visit the coarse tier. It's time to acquire the real instrument, the hollowbone and steel architecture that will shape you, quite literally, into the woman society expects you to be. The bell above the door of the corset, I erase shop chimes softly, a delicate sound that seems immediately absorbed by the bolts of fabric lining the walls. The air smells of starched cotton, hot metal from a pressing iron, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent of sweat, the ghost of countless fittings. This is not the grand, bustling space of a department store. It's an intimate, almost clinical room, ruled by a woman with a measuring tape draped around her neck like a stethoscope. She's Madame Dubois, and her reputation for creating the most elegant and formidable foundations in the city precedes her. Her hands, practiced and impersonal, guide you behind a heavy curtain into a small fitting area. There's a full-length mirror, a hard wooden chair, and a low table. And on that table, it lies. It doesn't look like clothing. It lies there like a deflated piece of armor or a piece of art sculpture. It is an intricate construction of cream-colored coeutol, a fabric so densely woven it feels more like canvas than cloth. Channels are stitched with painstaking precision all over its surface, and through the fabric, you can see the faint, rigid outlines of the bones that give it its unyielding shape. You reach out and touch it. It's surprisingly heavy. You run a finger along one of the bowling channels, feeling the inflexible rod sealed within. It doesn't give, at all. Madame Dubois picks it up, and it unfolds with a stiff rustle. A lovely choice, she says, her voice matter-of-fact. The spoon-busk front will give you that perfectly flat stomach profile, very fashionable. She points to the front, which is comprised of two long, flat pieces of steel. One has a series of metal studs, like little mushrooms, and the other has corresponding eyelets. This, you realize, is how you will get in and out of the thing. It doesn't pull over your head, it clasps you in from the front, a metal gate closing across your torso. And here's a little secret, a small detail that no one but you and Madame Dubois will ever know. While the outside is a respectable cream, the inside lining is a deep, defined scarlet. This is a common, though rarely discussed, practice. It's a tiny rebellion, a splash of hidden vibrancy against the drab propriety of your outer layers. This is the era's weird little fashion. Easter egg, a plain brown dress on the outside, could be hiding a corset of shocking magenta or brilliant emerald green underneath. It was a secret just for the wearer. This is the finest collet. Madame Dubois continues, turning it over to show you the back, a formidable array of crisscrossing laces threaded through dozens of tiny, metal-rimmed eyelets. Genuine Berlin, flexible, yet strong. This brings us to a key point of historical contention. While we call them hollowbone corsets, the material used was actually baleen, the flexible keratin plates from a whale's mouth. But was it always baleen? Historians and costume experts are still picking this apart. For the wealthy, like you, yes, it was the gold standard. But for the less affluent, corset makers used a whole menu of cheaper stiffeners, from steam-molded horn and rigid reeds to cording. And in some of the cheapest models, even thick, glued paper. The term hollowbone often became a generic descriptor for any stiffened corset, and scholars still debate how effective these different materials were and how they altered the experience of the women wearing them. But there's no time for academic debate now. It's your turn. After you've been stripped down to your chemise, a thin linen undergarment, Madame Dubois wraps the corset around you. The initial sensation is one of cold surprise as the steel bus presses against your sternum. She deftly fastens the front clasps, one by one. Click, 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 click. But the real transformation hasn't started yet. That begins at the back. Madame Dubois takes the long laces in her hands. Take a breath, mademoiselle, she advises. You do, and as you exhale, she pulls. The pressure isn't sharp, not yet. It's a deep, insistent hug that just keeps getting tighter. You feel the structure take hold, pressing in on your sides, your back. Your torso, which has been soft and pliable your whole life, is suddenly being introduced to an unyielding architectural force. She works her way down the laces, pulling them taut with an efficiency that borders on chilling. The soft flesh of your waist has nowhere to go but up and down. Push towards your bust and hips to create the coveted hourglass shape. She gives a final firm tug. Your posture is instantly, artificially corrected. Slouching is no longer a physical possibility. You are bolt upright, held in a rigid embrace. She leads you to the mirror. The reflection is startling. The shape you saw in the magazine is beginning to emerge on your own body. Your waist is cinched. Your bust and hips accentuated. It is a triumph of engineering. Madame Du Bois smiles a thin, satisfied smile. Voila! The foundation is laid. You stare at your reflection, a stranger in a scarlet-lined cage. You are a masterpiece. And you are a captive. You stand there for a moment, encased, looking at your new form in the mirror. It's impressive, a dramatic reshaping of your natural lines into the fashionable ideal. But then comes the next realization. A slow dawning and slightly panicked one: you need to get dressed. And you can't do it alone. The simple act of putting on your clothes, something you've done by yourself since you were a child, has just become a team sport. This is your new reality. Every single morning, the process of dressing will be a ritual, a performance with at least one other cast member. Today, it's Madame Du Bois, but at home, it will be your lady's maid, Lucy. She will be the keeper of your shape, the engineer of your daily confinement. Madame Du Bois guides you back to the wooden chair, and you find you can't simply sit. You perch on the edge, your spine held ramrod straight by the corset. She picks up your petticoats, layers and layers of them, starched and rustling. Normally you'd bend at the waist to step into them. Now you can't. The steel and baleen cage around your torso forbids it. You have to awkwardly lift your leg, almost like a flamingo, while Madame Du Bois gathers the voluminous fabric and guides it up and over your hips. It's clumsy, undignified, and entirely hidden from the public eye. Then comes the dress itself. It's a beautiful thing of deep sapphire wool, with a fitted bodice that's designed to lie perfectly smooth over your newly sculpted torso. But the back is a line of tiny, fabric-covered buttons stretching from your neck down to the impossible small of your back. You twist your arm trying to reach them. It's hopeless, your arm trying to reach them. It's hopeless. Your range of motion is severely limited. You can raise your arms fully above your head, nor can you twist your torso. Lucy's job, you now understand, will be far more than just helping with buttons. She will be the one to tighten the laces each morning to the precise, socially acceptable level of constriction. This was a dialogue without words. A slightly looser lacing might mean you're feeling unwell. A request to pull them a notch tighter could signal a particularly important social engagement where a flawless figure is paramount. This daily ritual is one of the most intimate, and often unspoken, relationships in a Victorian household. The maid saw the red marks on the skin, heard the quiet gasp for air, and knew the true cost of her mistress's elegance. This brings us to a rather quirky, cold water in the face bit of historical truth. This dependence created a strange power dynamic. A disgruntled lady's maid had a very unique, and frankly terrifying, form of leverage. There are anecdotal accounts and whispers in diaries of maids who, in a fit of pique, would deliberately over-tighten their mistress's laces, causing genuine pain and distress for the rest of the day. Or, perhaps more subtly, she might tie the knot in a way that was particularly difficult to undo later. It was a small, almost invisible act of rebellion that could ruin a woman's entire day. Your comfort, your very ability to breathe, was literally in her hands. But the process was just about getting dressed, it was about being assembled. After the dress comes the polishing. Lucy will straighten the seams, adjust the fold of the skirt, and ensure every wrinkle over the corseted torso is smoothed into oblivion. Your body is the mannequin, and the clothes are arranged upon it. You are no longer dressing yourself, you are being dressed. Historians are still piecing together the full extent of this codependent ritual. They study personal letters and servant memoirs to understand the nuances of this relationship. Was it a bond of female solidarity against a shared, uncomfortable reality, or was it a source of tension and resentment, a constant reminder of the class divide, enacted physically on the mistress's body every single day? The evidence suggests it was likely both, varying dramatically from household to household. The conversation between a mistress and her maid during the lacing process is a moment in history that is largely lost to us, a silent play performed millions of times in shuttered bedrooms. Finally, Madame Du Bois finishes the last button. She steps back, her work complete. You rise from your perch, your movements stiff and deliberate. You walk across the small room, the layers of fabric whispering around you. Your reflection in the mirror is flawless. The sapphire wool is a smooth, unbroken surface over your torso. The silhouette is perfect. There is no hint of the complex, rigid architecture hidden beneath, nor of the awkward, dependent struggle it took to get here, effortless and entirely self-possessed. It is the greatest magic trick of the 19th century. And the price of admission is your autonomy. You pay Madame Du Bois, the rustle of banknotes a crisp counterpoint to the rustle of your new petticoats, and step out of the shop into the bustling London street. The world feels different, sharper. The air itself seems to have a new texture as you draw it into your lungs, and that's when you feel it for the first time, the lie of the first breath. You try to take a deep, satisfying breath, the kind you did take after a long sigh. But you can't. The corset is an immovable wall. Your diaphragm, the powerful muscle at the base of your lungs that is supposed to contract and pull air deep into your body, is pinned down. It can't descend. The lower lobes of your lungs, where the most efficient gas exchange happens, are compressed, functionally useless. Panic, a small hot flicker, ignites in your chest. You consciously try again. Inhale, but the air only goes so far. It stops shallowly in the very top of your chest. This is your new way of breathing, or chest breathing. You are now exclusively using the smaller, less efficient intercostal muscles between your ribs to lift your chest and snatch small sips of air. Try it, just for a moment. Keep your stomach completely still and try to breathe only by raising and lowering your collarbones. Feel that tight, unsatisfying, perpetually out-of-breath sensation. Now imagine that's your only option, all day, every day. This is the central physiological reality of the tightly laced woman, a well-documented medical fact of the era. Doctors with stethoscopes were horrified. They noted the near silence in the lower parts of their female patients' lungs. The body, in its desperate need for oxygen, adapts. Your breathing rate increases, where you might have taken 16 calm, deep breaths a minute before. You might now be taking 22 shallow, rapid ones. Your heart has to work harder to pump more oxygen-deprived blood around your body. It puts a constant, low-level strain on your entire cardiovascular system. You begin to walk, your steps small and measured. The effort, which would have been negligible before, now leaves you feeling winded. A simple stroll becomes a form of mild exertion. You see a friend across the street and want to call out to her. But the thought of projecting your voice from this constricted airway is exhausting. You simply offer a stiff, regal nod instead. And here we stumble upon a truly bizarre, and frankly quite sad, little piece of trivia from the period, the corset voice. Actresses and singers complained bitterly about the effect of tight lacing on their vocal power. To sing or project from the diaphragm was impossible. Instead, they had to develop a breathy, head voice technique that lacked resonance and power. This led to a stereotype of the feminine voice being soft, high-pitched, and lacking in authority. It wasn't a natural state, it was an artificially imposed vocal handicap. The very sound of a woman's voice was being shaped by her underwear. You pause for a moment, ostensibly to look in a shop window, but really just to catch your breath. You can feel your own heartbeat, a little too fast, a little too frantic, fluttering like a trapped bird against the bars of your ribs. Is this feeling normal? Will you get used to it? The historical accounts are divided on this. Many women wrote in their diaries about the initial discomfort and shortness of breath, but claimed that the body eventually adapted. They learned to live in this state of slight oxygen deprivation. But what does adapted truly mean? Historians and medical experts are still debating this. Does the body genuinely recalibrate its baseline oxygen needs? Or did women simply become accustomed to a state of chronic, low-level suffocation? It's a chilling question. Were generations of women living in a perpetual state of feeling unwell, but redefining that feeling as normal? The evidence points towards the latter. This constant, Mild hypoxia could explain so much about the stereotypical delicate Victorian woman, the paleness, the lack of energy, the infamous fainting spells. You see a horse-drawn omnibus approaching, and for a fleeting moment, you consider hailing it, but the thought of climbing the steep steps of hoisting your constricted body upwards is too much. The short walk home suddenly seems like a Herculean task. You stand there, a perfect picture of refined womanhood on a busy London street. Your dress is exquisite, your posture impeccable. But beneath the facade, a quiet, desperate battle is being waged. Your lungs are fighting for air against an unyielding cage of hollowbone and steel. And the cage is winning. This is the first, and perhaps most profound, compromise. In exchange for the perfect silhouette, you have surrendered the simple, sacred act of taking a deep breath. You finally arrive home, the short walk having felt more like a cross-country trek. Lucy helps you out of your walking dress and into a slightly less formal afternoon gown. Though the corset, of course, remains firmly in place. It is a constant. Tea will be served soon, and you make your way to the parlor, looking forward to the simple pleasure of sitting down undressing, but even this small comfort is about to be redefined. You approach your favorite armchair, a plush, deeply cushioned seat that has always been your haven for reading or daydreaming. You turn and, with the muscle memory of a lifetime, begin to lower yourself into it. But you can't. The moment your back touches the soft upholstery, the corset fights back, the rigid steel busk at the front digs into your sternum, while the inflexible hollowbone stays at the back prevent your spine from curving naturally. To lean back is to have the corset structure push upwards, jamming the top edge into your armpits and the bottom edge into your hips. It's not just uncomfortable, it's genuinely painful. You push yourself upright again, startled. You try a different approach, attempting to perch on the edge of the chair. This is more manageable, but far from relaxing. You are sitting bolt upright, every muscle in your back and neck tensed, balancing on the chair rather than resting in it. Your body is held in a state of permanent, rigid presentation. Relaxation has been removed from your vocabulary of movement. This is a fundamental, and often overlooked, aspect of life in a corset. It completely changed a woman's relationship with her environment. Furniture that was designed for comfort became an obstacle course. You look around the parlor at the inviting sofas and chairs. They are no longer places of repose. They are props. You can sit on them, but you can no longer sink into them. The act of sitting becomes a performance of poise, a constant, low-level muscular effort to maintain a perfect, straight-backed posture that the corset demands. This leads us to a rather strange and specific little artifact of the era, the fainting couch. We often see them in period dramas, a chaise lounge with a backrest at only one end. But why were they so ubiquitous? While they were indeed used for women who felt faint, a common occurrence, as we know, their primary function was much more practical. They were one of the few pieces of furniture a tightly laced woman could actually recline on. You couldn't bend at the waist, but you could lie down sideways, your corseted torso remaining straight while you rested. The fainting couch wasn't just for fainting, it was for any time a woman wanted to get off her feet without being gouged by her own underwear. It was an ergonomic adaptation to a self-inflicted disability. You abandoned the armchair and moved to a less inviting, straight-backed dining chair. This is better. The chair's design is as unforgiving as your corset's, so they are at least in agreement. Use it, your back a few inches from the chair back, a model of perfect deportment. You feel less like a person in a room and more like a statue placed within it. Think about the long-term consequences of this. Your core muscles, the ones that support your spine, are completely disengaged. The corset is doing all the work. Over months and years, these muscles will atrophy, becoming weak and useless. This is why any women who had worn corsets their whole lives found it physically impossible to get weight on. Their own bodies could no longer support their weight. They were dependent on the external structure to simply sit or stand upright. But did all women experience this in the same way? Herein lies another one of those fascinating historical debates. Some costume historians argue that a well-made, custom-fitted corset would have distributed the pressure more evenly and, while restrictive, might not have been the torture device it's often made out to be. They suggest that much of the agony came from ill-fitting, mass-produced, or improperly laced corsets. The your mileage may vary argument. Medical historians point to the undeniable skeletal and muscular evidence and argue that even the best corset was still a fundamentally damaging garment that traded health for aesthetics. Was it possible to wear a corset correctly and avoid the worst effects, or was that just a myth perpetuated by the industry that sold them? The argument continues to this day, a debate between the idealized theory of construction and the lived reality of anatomy. You sit on your hard chair, hands folded neatly in your lap, waiting for the tea trolley. The soft, welcoming armchair across the room seems to mock you. It represents a world of physical ease that is no longer accessible. You have achieved the perfect posture, the very picture of ladylike grace, but in doing so, you have forgotten how to rest. You are a prisoner of your own poise, forever perched, never at peace. The soft clinking of porcelain announces the arrival of the tea trolley, wheeled in by Lucy. The familiar ritual, the aroma of Earl Grey, the sight of delicate cucumber sandwiches and petit fours usually brings a sense of comfort. But today it brings a new wave of anxiety. You have to eat. Lucy places a small plate on the table beside you. It holds two tiny, crustless finger sandwiches and a single, jewel-like raspberry tart. To an outside observer, it looks like a display of delicate, bird-like appetite. You know the truth. It's not about delicacy, it's about capacity. You pick up a sandwich. As you bring it to your mouth, you are acutely aware of the corset's pressure. It's a constant, unyielding band around your midsection, right where your stomach is. With every shallow breath, you feel the steel bust press against you. Now you're going to introduce food into this already crowded space. You take a small ladylike bite. You chew slowly, deliberately, but when you swallow, you feel the food's journey in a way you never have before. It travels down your esophagus and hits a roadblock. Your stomach, which should be a pliable bag ready to expand, is now squashed and compressed. It has been pushed upwards, its capacity severely reduced. There's simply not much room in there anymore. The feeling is one of immediate, uncomfortable fullness. After just a few small bites, you feel bloated, as if you've just consumed a massive holiday feast. The pressure in your abdomen intensifies. A dull ache begins to spread. This is the daily reality of dining in a tight corset. It's a direct conflict between basic biological needs and fashionable aesthetics. You put the half-eaten sandwich down, feigning a lack of appetite. To continue eating would be to invite disaster, indigestion, acid reflux, and a deeply unpleasant sensation of your own organs being crushed. This is why Victorian ladies were famed for picking at their food. It wasn't just a performance of feminine identiness. For many, it was a practical necessity. A full meal was a physical impossibility. This leads to one of the period's most common and unpleasant secret afflictions: chronic digestive issues. The simple mechanics of digestion were thrown into chaos. Food sat in the constricted stomach for longer, leading to fermentation, gas, and heartburn. Further down, the compressed intestines struggled to move waste along, making chronic constipation a widespread, though rarely discussed, female malady. The sheer volume of advertisements for laxatives, pills, and tonics aimed at women in 19th century publications is staggering. They promised to cure sluggishness, blockages, and that heavy feeling, all euphemisms for the direct consequences of organ compression. And here's a particularly strange little tidbit for you: some of the more extreme tight laces developed a specific technique for dinner parties. They would wear their corset relatively loose for the meal itself, allowing them to eat a respectable amount without causing a scene. Then, they would excuse themselves to the ladies' room, not to powder their nose, but to meet their maid, who would be waiting to pull the laces to their maximum, organ-crushing tightness for the post-dinner socializing. It was a strategic maneuver, a way to navigate the contradictory demands of being both a gracious dinner guest and a fashionable ideal. You ate the beautiful raspberry tart, your stomach crumbling in protest while simultaneously signaling that it's full. Your brain wants it, but your body is sending clear, painful signals of rejection. This internal conflict was the subject of much debate among physicians of the time. They wrote extensively, and with great alarm, about what they called corset-induced dyspepsia. They argued passionately that the fashion was creating a generation of malnourished, anemic women who were literally starving themselves for the sake of a tiny waist. But were they? This is where the historical picture gets a bit murky, and the debate continues. Some modern historians argue that the malnourished lady trope might be an exaggeration. They propose that women adapted by eating smaller, more frequent meals throughout the day, snacking on nutrient-dense foods like broths or eggs when they were in a less constricted state in the privacy of their homes. Was the picking at food in public a performance compensated for by more substantial eating in private, or were women genuinely suffering from chronic malnutrition due to their inability to eat properly during the main social meals of the day? We lack the detailed dietary journals to know for sure, making it a point of ongoing scholarly discussion. You politely decline the tart, much to Lucy's knowing lack of surprise. You sip your tea, the warm liquid a small comfort, but even it seems to fill you up too quickly. You are a participant in a ritual of consumption, but you are unable to truly consume. You are playing the part of a woman at tea, a picture of leisure and satisfaction, but beneath the serene surface, your body is in a state of distress, rejecting the very sustenance it needs to survive. Delicate china on the table feels like a mockery of your own delicate, compromised interior. Later that evening, in the privacy of your bedroom, Lucy helps you unlace. The relief is so profound it's almost painful. As the pressure recedes, blood rushes back into the compressed tissues, creating a tingling, pins and needles sensation. You can finally take a deep, shuddering breath. For a few glorious moments, you are free. Your corset lies on the bed, and for the first time you decide to really look at it. Not as an instrument of fashion, but as a piece of engineering. It's time to truly dissect this beast that has dominated your day. You pick it up. It's a complex, formidable object. The main body, as you know, is made of coeutol, chosen for its strength and inability to stretch. But it's the skeleton inside that gives it its power. You look closely at the boning channels. The primary stiffeners, the ones running down the front and sides, are what Madame Dubois proudly called baleen. This was the gold standard, the keratin, a US material from a whale's mouth, prized for its unique combination of strength and flexibility. It could be molded with steam to create the perfect curve, yet it was strong enough to resist the pressure of a human body. An entire industry was built on the hunting of whales, not just for oil, but to supply this essential component of women's fashion. The quest for a tiny waist had a very real and very large ecological footprint. But baleen was expensive. You examine the back of the corset near the laces. The bones here feel different. They are thinner, more rigid. These are likely steel. By the mid-19th century, advances in metallurgy made it possible to produce thin, flexible strips of steel that could be used in corsetry. Steel was cheaper, stronger, and more durable than baleen, but it lacked that organic flexibility. A corset made entirely of steel was often seen as less comfortable, more rigid, a true cage of steel. Most high-quality corsets like yours used a combination baleen for the curves around the bust and hips, and steel for the rigid support at the front busk and back lacing panels. Now for a truly weird and wonderful fact, a testament to human ingenuity in the service of discomfort. For those who couldn't afford baleen or steel, corset makers got creative. They used materials like woven horsehair, stiffened cords, and even vulcanized rubber. But perhaps the most surprising substitute was rattan, the same woody vine we use to make wicker furniture today. Strips of rattan would be steamed and shaped, offering a cheap, lightweight, and surprisingly effective stiffener. Imagine that your fashionable silhouette being held in place by the same material as your garden chair. You turn your attention to the front closure, the spoon busk. This was a major technological innovation of the 1870s. Earlier corsets had a simple, flat busk, which tended to press uncomfortably on the abdomen. The spoon busk was wider at the bottom, curving inwards and shaped, as the name suggests, like the bowl of a spoon. Its purpose was to press the stomach down and in, creating a perfectly flat front profile while supposedly being more comfortable. The patent for this design proudly proclaimed it an anatomical breakthrough. For you, wearing it all day, comfortable is not the word that comes to mind. It is a piece of industrial hardware designed to reshape human flesh. And then there are the laces. A single, incredibly long lace, often over 7 yards long, is threaded through the back. The sheer number of eyelets, dozens of them, each reinforced with stitched thread or a tiny metal grommet, is dizzying. This system was a force multiplier. It allowed your maid to apply an immense amount of pressure evenly down your back, cinching your waist with a mechanical advantage that would be impossible with a simple belt. But who was making these complex objects? This is where a common misconception gets corrected. While we might picture a male-dominated industry, the world of high-end corsetry was overwhelmingly female. The skilled cutters, the expert stitchers, the corsetiers like Madame Dubois who ran the fashionable shops, they were almost all women. It was one of the few skilled trades where women could earn a respectable living and even run their own businesses. There's a fascinating historical irony. He ran an industry largely run by women, producing an instrument that physically constrained women. Historians are still debating the implications of this. Was it a cynical exploitation of women by other women for profit, or was it a more complex situation, where female artisans took pride in their craft, seeing themselves as artists who helped other women achieve the beauty and status they desired? Did the corsetiers themselves believe in the aesthetic, or did they see it simply as a business? The answer is likely as complex as the course themselves, a mix of artistry, commerce, and complicity in a system they didn't create but certainly profited from. You lay the corset back down. It is no longer just a piece of underwear. You see it for what it is: a semi-organic machine, a hybrid of whale, steel, and cotton. It is a product of global trade, industrial technology, and female entrepreneurship. It is both a masterpiece of craft and an instrument of anatomical tyranny. And tomorrow morning, the ritual will begin again. A few weeks into your new life as a tightly laced woman, you receive an invitation to a grand ball. The excitement is immediate, but it's quickly followed by a familiar sense of dread. A ball means hours of standing, socializing, and most terrifyingly dancing. Your evening corset is even more formidable than your day one. It's made of shimmering silk satin and pushes your bust higher, cinches your waist a full inch tighter. As you stand before the mirror, ready to depart, you already feel lightheaded. The air in the ballroom will be hot, thick with the scent of perfume, candle wax, and hundreds of tightly packed bodies. You arrive, and the scene is as glittering as you imagined. But the heat is overwhelming. The chandeliers blaze, and the sheer number of people raises the temperature in the room to an uncomfortable degree. You try to find a spot near a window, but they are all occupied. You fan yourself, the small, frantic movement doing little to help. Your heart is already beating a rapid rhythm against your ribs. A young gentleman, a Mr. Ashworth, asks you to dance. To refuse would be a social misstep. You accept, and he leads you onto the floor for a quadrille. The dance requires you to move, to turn, to promenade. With each step, you feel the corset asserting its dominance. Your breathing becomes even more shallow, your vision starting to shimmer at the edges. The room is tilting. The music seems to be coming from a great distance. You place a hand on Mr. Ashworth's arm to steady yourself. He, being a well-bred young man, recognizes the signs immediately. Your face is pale, your breathing ragged. You are about to faint. This was the classic vapors, the stereotypical swoon of the Victorian lady. It was so common that it became a cultural trope, often depicted as a sign of delicate, feminine sensibility. But it wasn't about sensibility, it was about physiology. A tightly laced woman in a hot, crowded room, perhaps exerting herself by dancing, was a textbook candidate for fainting. The combination of restricted breathing, hypoxia, the corset pressing on the vagus nerve, which can cause a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, and the pooling of blood in the lower body was a perfect recipe for a brief loss of consciousness. Mr. Ashworth expertly guides you from the dance floor towards a set of chairs. Before you can get there, your knees buckle. The world dissolves into a dark, swirling tunnel, and then, nothing. You wake up moments later on a fainting couch in a quiet anteroom. A concerned lady dabbing your forehead with a handkerchief dipped in lavender water. You hear someone say, "She was overcome by the heat." It is the standard polite explanation. Everyone understands. Fainting wasn't a medical emergency, it was a social inconvenience, and a rather fashionable one at that. And here's the quirky, slightly cynical little secret of the swoon sometimes. It was a tactic. Fainting was one of the very few ways a woman could exert control over a social situation without saying a word. Trapped in a boring or unpleasant conversation, a graceful swoon offered an immediate escape. Feeling overwhelmed and needing a break from the rigid performance of femininity, fainting got you escorted to a quiet room where you could lie down and, most importantly, have your corset laces discreetly loosened by a sympathetic fellow woman. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. This leads to an ongoing debate among social historians to what extent was fainting a genuine physiological response. And to was it a learned, performative behavior? The evidence suggests a fascinating blend of both. The physical conditions were absolutely real. Women were genuinely prone to fainting. But they also learned that a well-timed swoon could be a powerful social tool. Doctors of the period were deeply divided on the issue. Some saw that as a legitimate female malady, which they named hysteria and attributed to a wandering womb. Others more cynically dismissed it as manipulative play acting, a way for women to get attention or shirk their duties. The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the messy middle. It was a real physical vulnerability that could be, unlike it was, strategically deployed when convenient. As you lie there, the room slowly coming back into focus, you feel a wave of embarrassment, but also a strange sense of relief. For a few minutes, you were free from the pressure to smile, to make pleasant conversation, to hold yourself perfectly upright. You were, for a moment, excused from the performance. The vapors were a double-edged sword. They were a symptom of your physical prison, but they were also, occasionally, the key to a temporary parole. A maid is summoned, and with a few deft tugs, she loosens the laces at your back. The rush of air into your lungs is dizzying, a more potent restorative than any smelling salts. You can breathe again. The world feels stable, but you know that before you can rejoin the party, you will have to be tightened back up, re-enclosed in the beautiful silk cage that brought you to this state in the first place. The brief escape is over. Months turn into a year, and the corset is no longer a novelty, it is a part of you, as essential as your shoes or your gloves. The initial discomfort has faded into a constant, low-level hum of pressure that you've learned to ignore. You've mastered the art of shallow breathing, of perching on chairs, of eating like a sparrow. You are, by all external measures, a perfectly adapted Victorian lady, but inside a slow, silent, and dramatic transformation is taking place. It's a secret event, hidden from all eyes, even your own. Your internal organs are on the move. Let's step away from the drawing rooms and ballrooms for a moment and enter the sterile, quiet world of a 19th century anatomy lab. Here, doctors and medical students are making shocking discoveries. They are dissecting the bodies of women who have been lifelong tight laces. And what they are finding is deeply disturbing. Let's imagine, for a moment, that we have a fantastical medical scanner that allows us to see inside your body as you stand there, perfectly poised. The first and most obvious victim of the pressure is your liver. The liver is a large, relatively soft organ located in the upper right quadrant of your abdomen. In a natural body, it's comfortably protected by the lower ribs. In your corseted body, it's a different story. The constant, intense pressure from your corset has squeezed it, pushed it, undeformed it. Over time, a deep, unnatural groove is carved across its surface, a permanent indentation left by the lower edge of your ribcage being pressed into it. Medical texts of the era are filled with grimly detailed drawings of the corset liver, sometimes showing the organ nearly bisected by this chronic pressure. But the liver is not on this journey alone. Your stomach, as you've already felt, has been shoved upwards out of its natural position. It's high in your chest cavity, squashed between your diaphragm and your other displaced organs. Its ability to function, to churn and digest, is permanently compromised. Below, it's a scene of utter chaos. Your intestines, the long coiled tubes of your small and large bowels, have been pushed downwards, deep into your pelvic basin. They are compressed into a dense, tangled mass, far from their intended location. This displacement is a key reason for the chronic constipation we talked about earlier. The natural peristaltic waves that move food along are disrupted. Everything is, quite literally, jammed up. This downward pressure has a domino effect. Your bladder is flattened, reducing its capacity and leading to a frequent, urgent need to visit the ladies' room. More alarmingly, your uterus and ovaries are also subjected to this relentless downward force, leading to a host of gynecological problems that doctors of the time were just beginning to understand. They noted a correlation between tight lacing and painful menstruation, pelvic inflammation, and even uterine prolapse, a condition where the uterus literally descends from its normal position. And here we find a very specific and rather grim little piece of medical trivia from the timely invention of the pessary. A pessary is a medical device inserted into the vagina to support the uterus and other pelvic organs. While they are used for various reasons today, their development and proliferation in the 19th century were driven, in no small part, by the need to counteract the organ prolapsing effects of the corset. It's a horrifying thought, one artificial device being used to fix the damage caused by another. This brings us to a major medical debate that raged throughout the latter half of the 19th century. A growing number of reformist doctors were publishing these anatomical findings, writing scathing articles in medical journals, like The Lancet. They argued, with evidence, that the corset was a public health crisis, a direct cause of female frailty and disease. They presented it as a clear case of fashion causing catastrophic, irreversible physical harm. However, a surprisingly large number of conservative, establishment doctors pushed back. This is where the historical debate gets fascinatingly complex. Some argued that these anatomical changes were merely adaptations, not pathologies. They claimed a woman's body was naturally more malleable and this organ displacement was not necessarily harmful. Others went even further, arguing that the corset was actually beneficial. They claimed it offered necessary support for the inherently weaker female frame, protected the organs from shocks, and even promoted good posture. Was this a genuine, albeit deeply flawed, medical opinion of the time? Or was it a form of motivated reasoning, a way to defend a societal status quo that they were comfortable with? Historians still argue about the motivations of these pro-corset doctors. Were they simply reflecting the ingrained misogyny of the era, or were they genuinely misinterpreting the evidence before them? Back in your drawing room, you feel a dull, familiar ache in your side. You dismiss it as a minor stitch, a common complaint. You have no way of knowing that it is the sound of your liver protesting, of your entire internal landscape being violently remapped. You are a pristine, elegant vessel on the outside. But inside, you are a refugee camp of displaced organs, a silent, slow-motion catastrophe hidden beneath the silken steel. The changes are not just happening to your soft tissues. The most profound and permanent transformation is happening to your very skeleton. Your bones, the supposedly solid, unchangeable framework of your body, are slowly, inexorably surrendering. You notice it in subtle ways. When you're undressed, you catch your reflection in the mirror. Your torso seems longer, narrower, even without the corset on. You run your hands over your sides, and the shape of your own ribcage feels different. Alien. The bottom ribs, the ones that are supposed to float freely to allow for deep breathing, are no longer in their proper place. Let's go back to our imaginary medical scanner. We've seen the chaos of your organs, now let's look at the bones. Your ribcage is supposed to be a proud, protective barrel shape housing your heart and lungs. Under the relentless pressure of the corset, this barrel has been crushed. The upper ribs are flared outwards, pushed up by the displaced organs and the constrictive force. But it's the lower ribs, from about the 7th rib down, that have suffered the most. They have been bent inwards at an unnatural angle, their natural curve reversed. The floating ribs, the 11th and 12th, which are not connected to the sternum, have been pushed so far inward that they are practically touching your spine. They are no longer protecting your organs, they are actively compressing them, acting as an internal corset made of your own bone. This skeletal deformation is the most damning evidence of the corset's power. It's not just squeezing flesh, it's re-engineering bone. This wasn't speculation, it was anatomical fact, observed and documented in skeletal collections from the period. Museums today still hold the skeletons of 19th century women, and the telltale signs of corset-induced deformity are undeniable: the warped ribs, the inward curve, the pinched waist. It is a permanent record of a lifetime of constriction, etched into the very bone. A forensic anthropologist could identify a Victorian tight lacer from her skeleton alone. And now for a truly strange and slightly horrifying detail that shows the body's desperate attempt to cope. In some of the most extreme cases, where the ribs were being pressed together with immense force, the body would sometimes form false joints or pseudo-arthrosis. Essentially, where two ribs were constantly rubbing against each other under pressure, the body would create a new, functional though entirely pathological joint, complete with cartilaginous synovial fluid. In an attempt to reduce the friction and pain, your skeleton was literally trying to evolve a new feature to survive the daily assault. You might feel a new kind of pain now, not the dull ache of organ pressure, but a sharp, specific pain in your back and sides. It's the cry of your skeleton. The vertebrae of your lower spine are also under immense strain. The natural, gentle curve of your lumbar spine is flattened, creating chronic back pain that you likely attribute to fatigue or nerve. This skeletal change is at the heart of a long-standing historical debate how much of this was permanent. If a young woman wore a corset tightly for a few years and then stopped, would her ribs return to their natural position? The consensus among medical historians and forensic experts is grim: probably not. While a young, still-growing body has more plasticity, the changes to mature bone, once set, are largely irreversible. The corset waist imprinted on the skeleton was, for most lifelong wearers, a permanent anatomical feature they would carry to their grave. The debate now often centers on the age at which the damage became irreversible. Was it a gradual process, or was there a point of no return after a certain number of years of tight lacing? It's a question that the silent skeletons in museum drawers can't fully answer. You press on your side, feeling the hard, unnatural edge of your own ribcage. You've been so focused on the external shape, the tiny waist you present to the world, that you never truly considered what was creating it. You thought it was the corset alone, but the truth is more intimate, more disturbing. The corset has recruited your own bones as its accomplice. It has turned your own skeleton against you, transforming your protective ribcage into an internal prison. The elegant silhouette you've worked so hard to achieve is not just a triumph of silk and baleen, it is a triumph of skeletal surrender. The cage is no longer just on the outside, you have started to become the cage itself. The day is over. The social calls have been made, the tea has been sipped, the performance is complete. Now, in the sanctuary of your bedroom with the door firmly closed, comes the moment of reckoning. It is time to undress. Lucy's fingers are quick and practiced as she unhooks the back of your dress. The fabric falls away, and you are left in your chemise and the corset. The air of the room, cool on your arms and shoulders, feels like a promise of freedom. Lucy begins to unlace. As she pulls the long lace free from the eyelets, the release is not a gentle sigh, but a series of jolts. With each loosened cross of the lace, you can feel a section of your body inflating, a territory being reclaimed. The process is slow. When the laces are finally loose enough, you unhook the front bust. Click, 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 click. The steel plates part, and you can finally pull the two halves of the corset away from your body. The wave of relief is so intense it makes you dizzy. You gasp, taking your first truly deep breath of the day. The air floods your lungs, reaching the lower lobes that have been dormant for the past 12 hours. It feels like drinking water after a day in the desert. You instinctively arch your back, stretching the muscles that have been held rigid for so long. The simple act of bending, of twisting, feels like a miraculous superpower. But the relief is immediately followed by the evidence. You turn to the full-length mirror and look at your own skin. Your torso is a roadmap of your confinement. Deep, angry red welts trace the path of every bone in the corset. They crisscross your back and sides, a perfect mirror image of the garment's structure. Where the top edge of the corset sat, there's a raw, chafed line. Where the bottom edge pressed into your hips, the skin is bruised, a mottled tapestry of purple and yellow. You can see the distinct, circular impressions left by the metal eyelets, like a series of tiny, identical brands. Your skin, which has been screaming silently all day, is now showing its testimony. This is the hidden reality that no one but you and your maid ever sees. The pristine white gowns and smooth silk bodices are a lie. Beneath them is a landscape of chafing, bruising, and broken skin. This was the universal, unspoken truth for corseted women. And here we find a sad, intimate little detail of their daily lives, the constant battle against skin breakdown. Women would use rice powder, cornstarch, or special balms to try and reduce the friction. They would sometimes sew extra padding into their chemises at key pressure points. But for many, especially in the heat of summer, it was a losing battle. The combination of sweat, friction, and pressure was a perfect recipe for sores, rashes, and even skin ulcers that would refuse to heal. Imagine having a persistent, painful open sore on your side that is re-aggravated every single day when you are laced back into your corset. You gently trace one of the red lines. The skin is hot to the touch, inflamed and tender. This daily damage, this cycle of injury and brief recovery, had long-term consequences. The skin along the corset lines would often become permanently discolored, thickened, and calloused over years of abuse. It was a form of scar tissue, the body's attempt to build up its own armor against the daily assault. But were these marks a source of shame, or something else? This is where the historical interpretation becomes nuanced. For most women, it was likely a private misery, a painful secret hidden under layers of linen and silk. However, for the subculture of extreme tight laces, these marks were sometimes viewed in a different light. In letters on niche publications dedicated to the art of tight lacing, some adherents described their corset marks with a strange sense of pride. They were seen as a testament to their dedication, a physical proof of their commitment to achieving the ideal figure. Were these marks a sign of victimhood or a badge of honor? The answer, it seems, depended entirely on the mindset of the woman looking in the mirror. It's a fascinating and slightly unsettling glimpse into the psychology of body modification. The historical debate around this topic often revolves around the question of silence. Why do so few mainstream diaries and letters from the period mention this specific daily reality of pain and skin damage? Some historians argue that it was simply so common, so universal, that it wasn't considered noteworthy, like complaining about the weather. Others suggest it was a matter of female propriety. It was considered unladylike to complain about such physical matters, a private burden to be borne with quiet fortitude. The silence itself is a form of evidence, pointing to a collective, unspoken endurance. You turn away from the mirror and slip on a loose-fitting nightgown. The soft, flowing fabric feels impossibly luxurious against your sore skin. For the next 8 hours, your body is your own. It can breathe, it can bend. It can begin the Sisyphean task of trying to heal itself before the whole process begins again at dawn. You lie in bed, feeling the ghost of the corset's pressure, a phantom limb of constriction that lingers long after the garment has been removed. But it is temporary. The elegant cage lies waiting on the chair, ready to reclaim you in the morning. You are visiting your married sister, and the sound of children's laughter fills the house. Your niece, a girl of about 10, runs into the room, her cheeks flushed from playing in the garden. She's wearing a simple cotton dress, her movements free and unrestrained. You watch her, a pang of something you can't quite name, nostalgia envy surfacing as she tumbles onto the floor with a puppy. But then your sister calls out, "Eleanor, darling, do come here. You've got your frock all rumpled. Let's get you straightened up." She leads the girl out of the room, and when they return a few minutes later, something has changed. Eleanor's posture is a little stiffer. The natural, childish slouch is gone. She's wearing what is known as a corded bodice or training corset. It's not the hollowbone and steel monstrosity that you wear. Not yet. It's a softer, more flexible garment, stiffened with rows of thick cotton cording rather than bone. But its purpose is identical: to begin the long, gradual process of molding the body. From a young age, a girl in a middle or upper-class family was taught that her body was something to be controlled, disciplined, and shaped. This is a fundamental truth of the Victorian era. The journey into corsetry didn't start with a woman's first ball gown. It started in the nursery. The goal was to train the soft bones and muscles of a growing child, to accustom her to the feeling of restriction, and to instill the all-important lesson of posture. A girl who was allowed to run and slump freely was seen as running the risk of becoming a hoyden and a boisterous, unladylike girl. The training corset was as much a tool for social conditioning as it was for physical shaping. You watch your niece now. She's no longer tumbling on the floor. She's sitting carefully on a small stool, her back straight, her hands folded. The boundless energy has been contained. The puppy, sensing the change, wanders off to find another playmate. This practice of starting early leads to a particularly sad and bizarre piece of historical trivia: the existence of dolls with perfectly corseted, wasp-waisted figures. These weren't just fashion dolls for adult collectors, they were playthings for little girls. A girl would dress her doll in miniature, perfectly constructed corsets, learning the mechanics of lacing and the aesthetics of the ideal shape long before she was subjected to it herself. It was a brilliant, and slightly insidious, way of normalizing the whole process. By the time it was her turn to be laced into a training bodice, the concept was already familiar, something she had practiced on her miniature, silent friend. This early start is a point of significant contention among historians and pediatric specialists who study the period. Medical reformers of the 19th century were horrified by it. They wrote passionate pleas to mothers arguing that constricting a growing child's body was catastrophic for her development. They claimed it would stunt her growth, weaken her muscles, and deform her skeleton at the most vulnerable stage of her life. They drew direct lines from childhood corseting to the frail, sickly young women they were seeing in their clinics. On the other side of the debate were the mothers and the powerful voices of women's magazines. They argued that they were not harming their daughters, but helping them. They believed that a girl's body, if left to its own devices, would grow coarse and ungainly. They saw the training corset as a necessary tool to ensure a graceful, feminine posture and figure. Was this genuine belief or a form of internalized societal pressure? Historians still debate the motivations. Were these mothers lovingly guiding their daughters toward a life of social acceptance? Or were they unconsciously perpetuating a cycle of physical harm, passing down the architecture of their own confinement to the next generation, the genuine conviction that they were doing the right thing, a chilling testament to how deeply the aesthetic ideal was ingrained? You look at Eleanor sitting so still, a miniature version of the perfectly poised women in your own social circle. You remember your own childhood, the first time your mother fitted you for a corded bodice. You remember the strange feeling of being held, of being unable to take a full, deep, belly-laughing breath. You remember learning to play games that didn't involve too much running. You had forgotten all of that, but seeing your niece brings it flooding back. The process was so gradual, so normalized, that you never thought to question it. It was simply what was done. It was part of growing up, like learning your letters or practicing the pianoforte. But now, looking at this vibrant child whose energy has been so swiftly and subtly curtailed, you see it for what it is: the first step in the construction of a beautiful cage. The foundation isn't laid in the corsier's shop in your late teens. The ground is broken in the nursery with a soft, corded bodice and a doll with an impossibly small waist. One evening, your husband comes home from his club, looking troubled. Hes a man of business, pragmatic and usually unconcerned with the intricacies of fashion. But tonight, something is on his mind. He tells you Hes been speaking with a colleague, a doctor, who was holding forth with great passion on the corset question. He says they are instruments of slow torture, your husband says, looking at you with a new, uncertain expression. He showed me a drawing from a medical journal. It was unsettling. This is the other side of the story, the male perspective, and it was far from monolithic. The Victorian man's relationship with the corset was a messy, contradictory tangle of desire, concern, and condemnation. On one hand, you have the doctors, the medical reformers. They were the most vocal and articulate opponents of tight lacing. They saw the direct consequences in their clinics and on their dissecting tables. They wrote the articles, published the terrifying anatomical diagrams of displaced organs and warped ribs, and gave lectures warning of a public health crisis. They framed it as a medical issue, a pathological fashion that was weakening the very mothers of the next generation of the British Empire. For these men, your corset was a symbol of dangerous ignorance. On the other hand, you have the artists, poets, and lovers. For them, the corseted figure was the absolute pinnacle of female beauty. The wasp waist, the exaggerated curve of the hips, the high prominent bust, this was the stuff of fantasy. They wrote odes to the hourglass figure. They painted idealized portraits of women with impossibly tiny waists. This group of men was not concerned with your internal organs, they were captivated by your external silhouette. They celebrated as the epitome of femininity and allure. For these men, your corset was a work of art. Then you have the vast majority of men, like your husband, the businessmen, the politicians, the everyday gentleman. Their view was often a confused mixture of the two extremes. They publicly agreed with the doctors that extreme tight lacing was probably a bad thing, a foolish vanity. A foolish vanity, they would nod along sagely when the topic of dress reform came up. But privately, they were conditioned by their culture to find the corseted silhouette attractive. A man's wife was a reflection of his status. A wife with a fashionable, slender-waisted figure was a testament to his success, a beautiful ornament to be displayed at his side. This contradiction is beautifully and bizarrely illustrated by a strange piece of popular culture from the time the tight lacing correspondence columns in certain risque magazines. These were letters often written by men under pseudonyms, expressing their intense admiration for and fascination with tight lacing. They would write in with breathless excitement about seeing a woman with a particularly tiny waist, or share fantasies about lacing their wives or sweethearts ever tighter. Semi-hidden world of male fetishism, existing right alongside the public condemnation of the practice. So what did your husband really think? This is the great, unresolvable question that haunted many Victorian marriages. He would say he valued your health above all else. He would express concern if you seemed unwell or fainted at a party. But would he be quite as proud to escort you into a ballroom if you had a natural, uncorseted 28-inch waist instead of your fashionable, constricted 20-inch one? Historians are still untangling this knot of male hypocrisy and contradiction. They analyze private letters, public statements, and the popular culture of the time to try and understand this deep cultural dissonance. Did men secretly want their wives to suffer for beauty, or were they simply blind to the reality of that suffering, preferring the aesthetic illusion to the anatomical truth? Some scholars argue that it was a form of willful ignorance, where men could both desire the result and absolve themselves of responsibility for the method. Others suggest a more complex psychological state, where the ideal of feminine delicacy, which included frailty and fainting, was itself part of the attraction. The debate continues: was the ideal woman a healthy partner, or a beautiful, fragile object? Your husband sighs, taking your hand. Promise me you are not overdoing it, my dear. You smile, a practiced, reassuring smile. Of course not, you lie, even as you can feel the unyielding pressure of the steel busk against your sternum. You are reassuring him, allowing him to retreat back into the comfortable space of not having to think about it too deeply. You are protecting him from the ugly reality of your beauty. He accepts your answer, relieved. The conversation is over. He sees you once again as his beautiful, elegant wife, not the subject of a gruesome medical diagram. And in this moment, you understand your role perfectly. You are to be the seamless, perfect product. The messy, painful, and dangerous process of your own creation is a secret you must keep, not just from the world, but from the very man who professes to love you. One day, while leafing through a ladies' magazine, you come across a small, discreet advertisement tucked away in the back pages. It's not for a courtier like Madame Du Bois. It's for a publication, a journal with a plain cover, titled The English Woman's Correspondent. The ad promises a community for ladies who wish to correspond on the art of shaping the form. Intrigued, you discreetly order a copy. When it arrives, sealed in a plain brown wrapper, you discover a world you never knew existed. This isn't about fashion in the mainstream sense. This is a subculture. A community of women, and some men, who were not just wearing corsets for fashion, but were engaged in what they called tight lacing as a dedicated, all-consuming hobby. The journal is filled with letters from anonymous contributors identified only by pseudonyms like Wasp Waist, Stay Laced, or Figure Trainer. They write with a fervent, almost religious zeal. For them, the goal isn't just a 20-inch waist. They speak of 18 inches, 16 inches, even in hushed and reverent tones, the mythical 14-inch waist. You read their letters, a mix of fascination and horror. They talk about sleeping in their corsets, a practice that even you, a dedicated wearer, would find unthinkable. They describe gradually tightening their laces over weeks and months, shaving fractions of an inch off their circumference with a dedication that borders on athletic. They exchange tips on the best type of corset for maximum reduction ones with extra strong steel, more lacing eyelet, and specialized screw fastenings for achieving the tightest possible fit. This was a true body modification subculture, existing in the shadows of mainstream Victorian society. They were the corset hobbyists, the waist training fanatics. Their goal wasn't just to look fashionable, it was to achieve a physical feat, to push their bodies to the absolute limit of what was possible. And here we find a truly bizarre, unspecific piece of this subculture's lore: the lacing and parties. These were secret gatherings where a group of fellow enthusiasts would meet. The centerpiece of the event would be one woman being laced into her corset by 2 or 3 others, all pulling together to achieve a waist measurement she could not attain on her own. It was part ritual, part entrance test, a strange, intimate performance of shared obsession. You read a letter from Wasp Waist, who proudly proclaims she has not been fully unlaced in over a year, only loosening her corset for bathing before being immediately tightened again. She describes the feeling of her body settling into its new shape, the initial pain giving way to a sense of security and support. She writes not of suffering but of triumph. This is where the historical and psychological analysis becomes incredibly complex. Were these women simply extreme victims of societal pressure, taking the fashion imperative to its most logical and damaging conclusion, or was something else going on? This is a point of intense debate among historians who study gender and the body. Some scholars argue that, in a strange and paradoxical way, extreme tight lacing could be seen as a form of female agency. In a world where women had so little control over their lives, their finances, their reproductive choices, their own bodies were one of the few domains they could exert absolute, meticulous control over. This punishing discipline, this reshaping of their own fashion bone, could be interpreted as a radical act of self-creation. It was a painful, dangerous form of control, but it was control nonetheless. Other historians vehemently disagree. They argue that this is a romanticized view of what was, essentially, a form of self-harm driven by a deeply pathological body, dys morphiae, itself created by societal pressures. They point to the undeniable medical consequences and argue that to frame this as agency is to ignore the immense suffering involved. Was it a reclamation of the body, or a total surrender to an oppressive ideal? The debate is fierce and ongoing, touching on core questions of feminism, psychology, and the nature of consent in a restrictive society. You put the journal down, your mind reeling. You thought you understood the world of corsetry. You saw it as a social necessity, a requirement for respectability and beauty. But this is different. These women are not reluctant participants, they are devotees. They have taken the instrument of your daily, low-level discomfort and turned it into the central project of their lives. You look at your own corset on its stand, the familiar cream-colored carutal. It suddenly seems moderate, tame even. The discovery of this hidden world makes you question your own motivations. You are not one of them, not a zealot. But you are wearing the same garment, subscribing to the same basic aesthetic. The line between you and the women in the plain brown wrapper is thinner and more terrifying than you had ever imagined. You decide to order a new corset, perhaps a slightly more fashionable one for the upcoming season. But instead of going to the intimate, boutique-like shop of Madame Dubois, you find yourself in one of the new, grand department stores that are springing up across London. And here you witness a sight that fundamentally changes your understanding of the corset. You see it not as a bespoke instrument of transformation, but as a mass-produced commodity. In a vast, well-lit hall surrounded by displays of gloves, fans, and perfumes is the corset department. And it is enormous. There are tables piled high with corsets of every size, shape, and color. There are long counters with dozens of cardboard boxes, each containing a neatly folded corset ready to be purchased off the shelf. This isn't about intimate fittings and custom craftsmanship. This is an industry. You see women of all classes browsing the tables. A wealthy woman like yourself, attended by her maid, might be looking at the high-end models in silk and genuine boline. But right next to her, a shop girl on her day off, or a factory worker spending a precious portion of her wages, is looking at the cheaper models. These are made of coarse cotton, stiffened with thick cording, steel, or even the infamous paper-based stiffeners. The ideal of the hourglass figure has trickled down. It is no longer just a marker of the leisure class. It has become a requirement for any woman who wants to be considered respectable or fashionable, regardless of her station. This mass production is a key economic story of the 19th century. The corset industry was colossal, employing hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women. From the workers in the textile mills weaving the coveted, to the metal adjusters forging the steel buskets and eyelets, to the armies of women in factories and sweatshops, stitching the garments together, it was a huge engine of the industrial economy. And here we discover a fascinating, and slightly ironic, fact about this female-dominated industry. The first patents for steam-powered corset molding machines and mass production sewing techniques were filed by men. But the workforce, the people who actually operated these machines and assembled the garments, were overwhelmingly female. Factory work was one of the few avenues of employment for working-class women, but the conditions were often grim. Long hours, low pay, and the constant pressure of production quotas were the norm. There is a deep historical irony in the image of a factory full of women, hunched over their sewing machines with their own bodies likely constricted by cheaper versions of the very garments they are producing, all to fuel a fashion that dictates a life of leisure they will never know. You pick up one of the mass-produced corsets. It's light and flimsy compared to your custom-made one. The stitching is less precise, the materials coarser. These were often sold by waist size, with little regard for the individual proportions of a woman's body. An ill-fitting corset was even more damaging than a well-made one, concentrating pressure on all the wrong places, digging and chafing with a particular viciousness. The rise of the factory and the department store democratized the corset, but it may have also increased the net amount of suffering. This is a point of debate among economic and social historians. Did mass production liberate working-class women by giving them access to the same fashion ideals as the wealthy, or did it enslave them by creating a new, expensive, and physically harmful standard they were now expected to meet? Some historians argue it was a form of social aspiration, a way for a woman to feel modern and stylish, a small investment in her own self-esteem. Others argue it was a cruel new burden, forcing women to spend their meager wages on a garment that literally hindered their ability to work and caused them chronic pain. The democratization of discomfort is a complex legacy. As you stand there, in the middle of this bustling department, the scale of it all is breathtaking. You realize that the corset is not just a personal choice or a social mandate. It is a key component of industrial capitalism. Your desire for a smaller waist, multiplied by millions of other women, is fueling international trade in materials and creating fortunes for department store owners. You suddenly feel less like an individual making a fashion choice and more like a tiny cog in a gigantic, relentless machine. The pressure you feel around your waist is not just from Berlin and Steele. It is the pressure of an entire economic system, a system that has successfully commodified a desire and sold it back to you in a cardboard box. You came here to buy a new corset, but you leave with a profoundly unsettling understanding of what it truly represents, not just the shaping of your body, but the shaping of an entire economy. A few years into your marriage, the inevitable and joyous news arrives: you are expecting a child. This moment, a celebrated milestone in a woman's life, brings with it a terrifying new question: what about the corset? Surely now, you will be granted a reprieve. A 9-month parole from your hollowbone prison. You imagine, with a sense of giddy relief, the freedom of a body allowed to expand naturally, to accommodate the new life growing within. You are mistaken. Your mother and your married sister sit you down for a serious talk. To go entirely without support during this delicate time, they explain, would be unseemly and potentially harmful. It would be bad for your posture, they claim, and could lead to a permanent loss of your figure after the baby is born. The solution is not to abandon the corset, but to adapt it. You are taken back to a corsetier, perhaps even Madame Du Bois herself, for a fitting. But this time, you are being fitted for a maternity corset. It is a strange and contradictory garment. On one hand, it is designed to be more adjustable. It features panels of elastic, a relatively new invention, intricate systems of adjustable laces at the sides, front, and back, and often a larger, more accommodating spoon busk. The idea is that as your body changes, you can gradually let out the laces, providing gentle support without constriction. That is the theory. The reality is different. You put on the maternity corset, it is still a formidable piece of engineering. While it may not be cinching your waist to its former 20-inch circumference, it is still holding you, shaping you, and yes, constricting you. The habit of shallow chest breathing is reinforced. The desire to slouch or relax is still impossible. It's a slightly larger, more forgiving cage, but it is a cage nonetheless. This brings us to one of the most medically alarming aspects of the entire corset culture. The idea of compressing the abdomen of a pregnant woman is, to modern eyes, utterly horrifying. 19th century reformers felt the same way. Doctors wrote frantic articles, warning that these maternity corsets were a direct threat to both mother and child. They argued that the pressure could restrict fetal growth, interfere with the baby's positioning, and even increase the risk of miscarriage or stillbirth. The support the corset claimed to offer was, in their view, a dangerous delusion. And here we find a truly bizarre and sad little detail: the attempt to hide the pregnancy itself for as long as possible. In the early to mid-Victorian era, pregnancy was not something to be celebrated publicly. It was a delicate condition to be concealed. A well-designed maternity corset, in the first few months, could help a woman maintain her fashionable silhouette, effectively masking her changing body from the public eye. It was a tool for maintaining social propriety, even at the expense of maternal and fetal health. So why did women wear them? This is a point of deep and sorrowful debate for historians. Were they simply ignorant of the dangers, trusting the advice of their mothers and the advertisements that promised a safe and comfortable pregnancy, or were they so deeply conditioned to fear the loss of their figure that they were willing to take this risk? The evidence suggests a complex mix of factors. For many, it was about the promise of getting their figure back after birth. The advertisements for maternity corsets often featured before and after illustrations showing a woman seamlessly transitioning back to her wasp-waisted form. The fear of being left with a permanently changed, matronly body was a powerful motivator. Furthermore, the concept of support was deeply ingrained. Many women genuinely believed that the growing weight of their abdomen needed to be held up by an external structure. Having worn a corset for years, their own core muscles were so atrophied that the feeling of being unsupported was likely physically uncomfortable and alarming. They had been trained to believe that their bodies were inherently weak and incapable of handling pregnancy without mechanical assistance. You wear your new corset, feeling the familiar pressure in a new, more worrying way. You feel the life inside you move, a tiny flutter against the unyielding wall of your coeutelan steel confinement. You are supposed to be a vessel for a new life, a nurturing, protective space. But you are still bound, still shaped by the demands of an external ideal. The cage has just been slightly enlarged to accommodate a second prisoner. The question of whose health and whose comfort takes precedence: yours, the baby's, or society's ideal of your figure is a silent, constant tension you carry for 9 long months. The years pass. You've navigated pregnancies, raised children, and settled into the comfortable rhythm of a society hostess. The corset is no longer a choice or even a conscious thought, it's a fundamental part of your anatomy. Put on every morning as automatically as brushing your hair. The chronic backaches, the indigestion, the shortness of breath, they are all just part of the background noise of your life, the accepted price of elegance. But outside the cushioned walls of your home, the intellectual tide is turning. The scattered voices of medical reformers are growing into a powerful, organized chorus of condemnation. And they have a new weapon: the printing press. One day your husband brings home a copy of a popular magazine, not for the fashion plates, but for an article he insists you read. It's titled "The Horrors of the Corset, an Anatomical Warning to the Women of England." And the centerpiece of the article is an illustration. It's a medical diagram, a detailed, clinical, and utterly shocking drawing. It depicts 2 female torsos side by side. On the left is the Venus de Milo, representing the natural, uncorsted female form. Her ribs are a proud, open curve. Her ribs are a proud, open curve. Her organs, the liver, stomach, and intestines, are neatly arranged in their proper places. She looks strong, healthy, vital. On the right is the corseted woman. And it is a vision of anatomical chaos. The drawing is a brutal, visual representation of everything you have been experiencing internally for years. You see the ribcage crushed inwards, the floating ribs nearly touching the spine. You see the liver, grotesquely grooved and displaced. You see the stomach pushed high into the chest and the intestines crammed into the pelvis. It's not an abstract concept anymore. It is there, in black and white, a detailed, scientific map of your own internal damage. These images were becoming increasingly common in the latter part of the 19th century. Advances in printing technology allowed for the cheap, mass reproduction of these detailed and often gruesome anatomical drawings. They were published in medical journals like The Lancet, but also in mainstream magazines, health pamphlets, and books aimed at a general audience. The reformers had realized that a single, powerful image could be more persuasive than 1,000 words of warning. They were, in essence, launching one of the first public health visual campaigns. The goal was to shock, to tear away the beautiful illusion of the silk gown and reveal the brutal reality beneath. It was to make women like you confront the direct, cause and effect relationship between the fashionable silhouette and the mangled interior. And here we find a very specific and impactful bit of trivia from this campaign: the organ lectures. Some of the more zealous medical reformers would give public lectures, and as their grand finale, they would unveil jars containing the preserved organs of deceased tight lacers. They would hold up a healthy liver, and then a corset liver, and then a corset liver, its surface scarred with a deep, permanent groove. It was visceral, sensationalist, and according to reports, incredibly effective. It was the 19th century equivalent of putting warning labels on cigarette packets. You stare at the drawing in the magazine, your hand unconsciously going to your own waist. The dull ache you feel there suddenly has a name and a shape. It is the feeling of your own ribs pressing into your own liver. The image is so powerful, so undeniable, that it feels like a personal accusation. But how did the pro-corset side fight back? This is where the historical debate gets truly fascinating. They couldn't deny the anatomical evidence. The dissections were real, so they changed tactics. They began to argue that these were extreme, exceptional cases. They would say, yes, a foolish girl who laces to excess might do this to herself, but a respectable lady who laces in moderation for gentle support will be perfectly fine. They created a narrative that separated the sensible corset wearer like you tell yourself, from the vain, hysterical tight lacer. This is a classic case of what historians call shifting the goalposts. They were essentially trying to create a safe level of a fundamentally unsafe practice. Did this moderate lacing actually prevent the damage? Medical historians today would argue that while it might have been less severe, the fundamental mechanics of compression were the same. Any level of consistent, rigid corseting would inevitably lead to some degree of muscle atrophy and organ displacement. The idea of a healthy corset was likely a myth, a clever piece of marketing propaganda designed to reassure a public that was growing increasingly nervous. The debate continues: was moderate lacing a viable middle ground or just a comforting lie? You fold the magazine and put it aside, but the image is burned into your memory. It follows you for days. Every time you feel a twinge of indigestion or a shortness of breath, you see that drawing. The doctors are no longer just abstract figures, they are pointing directly at you, holding up a mirror to your own invisible injuries. The beautiful architecture of your corset has been recast in your mind. It is no longer a symbol of elegance. It is a blueprint for your own destruction. The unsettling image from the magazine coincides with a new and startling phenomenon you begin to notice in your social circles. It starts with a cousin, a young woman known for her artistic and bohemian inclinations. She arrives at a family luncheon, and something about her is immediately, shockingly different. She isn't wearing a corset. You can tell instantly. Her waist under her simple flowing wool dress is thick and natural. She moves with a fluid, easy grace that you haven't seen in a woman in years. She bends to pick up a drop napkin without the stiff, deliberate motion of a corseted lady. When she sits, she actually leans back in her chair. She looks comfortable, and the reaction from the other women in the room is a silent, collective gasp. This is your first encounter with a member of the aesthetic dress or rational dress movement. They were a small but vocal group of rebels, the punks of the Victorian era, comprised of artists, intellectuals, and early feminists. They argued that fashion should be beautiful, yes, but also healthy and practical, and their number one enemy was the corset. They called it a deforming cage, a symbol of female subjugation. They advocated for clothing that was loose, unstructured, and allowed the body to move freely. Their ideal was the flowing drapery of classical Greek statues, not the rigid, artificial silhouette of the Parisian fashion plates. These women were making a radical political statement with their clothes. To abandon the corset was to reject the entire Victorian ideal of womanhood, the delicate, ornamental, non-laboring lady. It was an act of open rebellion. This movement gained traction in artistic circles like the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, who painted women with natural, uncorseted forms. It was championed by progressive thinkers and early feminists who saw the link between physical and social liberation. If a woman couldn't even breathe freely, how could she be expected to think freely? And now for a quirky and specific detail about these dress reformers: their obsession with undergarments. They didn't just reject the corset, they redesigned everything from the skin out. They championed emancipation waists soft, button-on bodices for holding up skirts and, most shockingly, bifurcated garments to be worn under the skirt. Yes, we are talking about drawers or bloomers. For many of it that resembled trousers, even hidden under her dress, was deeply scandalous and considered unsexing. The dress reformers were not just fighting for comfort, they were fighting a culture war over the very definition of femininity. Your great aunt, a formidable matriarch of the old school, stares at your cousin with undisguised horror. "My dear," she says, her voice dripping with condescension, "are you unwell?" The implication is clear: to appear in public in such a state of undress is a sign of either illness or moral deficiency. This is the heart of the historical debate surrounding the dress reform movement. Was it an influential precursor to modern feminism, a brave first step towards women's liberation, or was it a fringe, eccentric movement that was largely ridiculed and ignored by the mainstream for many years? Historians tended towards the latter view, dismissing them as a small group of oddballs. However, more recent scholarship has begun to re-evaluate their impact. While they may not have convinced the majority of women to burn their corsets overnight, they successfully planted the seeds of doubt. They started a conversation. They forced mainstream society to at least acknowledge and defend its choices. They provided a visible, alternative way of being a woman. The debate today often centers on their long-term influence. Did the dress reformers directly lead to the eventual abandonment of the corset, or were they simply a sideshow, with the real change being driven later by larger forces like World War I and the changing role of women in the workforce? It's a classic history from below versus great events argument. Your cousin simply smiles at your great-aunt's jab. On the contrary, "Aunt," she says, taking a deep, satisfying breath that you can only envy, "I have never felt better." You watch her, a storm of conflicting emotions in your heart. Part of you is scandalized, conditioned by a lifetime of conformity. You see her as sloppy, unrefined, a betrayal of her class and upbringing. But another part of you, a small, secret part that remembers the anatomical diagrams and the daily discomfort, is filled with a dangerous, exhilarating envy. She looks free. The encounter leaves you deeply unsettled. For your entire life, there has only been one acceptable way for a woman to look. Now, you have seen another. It's a radical, unsettling idea. The cage you have just discovered has a door. You have no intention of walking through it, of course. The social cost would be far too high, but just knowing it's there changes everything. The conversation around you continues to be dominated by your cousin's scandalous appearance. As the ladies dissect her unfortunate choice of dress, a rumor, one you've heard whispered before, surfaces again. An older woman leans in, her voice slow and conspiratorial. "I've heard," she says, "that some women, the truly vain ones, do something far worse than just tight lacing. They have a surgeon remove their lower ribs." The table falls silent. The idea is so grotesque, so extreme, that it hovers in the air like a foul odor. The surgical removal of healthy bones for the sake of a smaller waist. Could it be true? This is one of the most persistent and sensational myths of the Victorian era. It is the ultimate horror story of cosmetic vanity, a tale that has been told and retold for over a century. It often attaches itself to famous names, actresses, singers, and society beauties who were known for their impossibly tiny waists. The logic seems plausible: if the ribs are in the way, why not just take them out? The story you just heard is a perfect example of a classic urban legend. It's shocking, it involves a secret and taboo act. It warns against the dangers of vanity. And it's almost impossible to verify. It has all the hallmarks of a piece of folklore, passed from person to person as a cautionary tale. So, let's get to the truth. Did this actually happen? The overwhelming consensus among medical historians and scholars is almost certainly no. There is not a single, verifiable, documented case of a 19th century surgeon performing a rib removal for cosmetic reasons. Why are historians so confident in debunking this myth? Firstly, the surgical risk would have been astronomical. This was an era before antibiotics and modern anesthesia. An invasive surgery like opening the chest cavity to remove ribs would have carried an incredibly high risk of infection, hemorrhage, and death. No reputable surgeon would have attempted it. And any back alley quack who did would have likely left a trail of dead patients. Secondly, there is simply no evidence in the medical literature of the time. Doctors wrote about everything. They documented strange cases, new procedures, and pathological findings in minute detail. The medical journals are filled with condemnations of the corset. If surgeons were actually performing rib removals, it's virtually certain that the medical community would have known about it and written about it, most likely with outrage and horror. Their silence on this specific procedure is deafening. So, if it didn't happen, why did the rumor exist? This is where the historical debate gets interesting. The myth wasn't really about surgery, it was about the corset itself. It was a powerful piece of propaganda for the anti-corset movement. By suggesting that women were willing to go to such monstrous lengths for beauty, it highlighted the perceived insanity of the fashion. It was a way of saying, this trend is so crazy, people are literally mutilating themselves for it. The rumor was a metaphor made literal. The debate among historians now is not about whether it happened, but about why people believed it so readily. Some argue that it reflects a deep societal anxiety about the blurring lines between the natural and the altering. The God-given skeleton was the ultimate transgression. Others suggest it was a form of misogynistic caricature, painting fashionable women as so vain and empty-headed that they would gladly trade their own bones for a smaller waist. The myth of rib removal, then, tells us less about Victorian surgical practices and more about Victorian fears and prejudices. Back at the luncheon, the ladies shudder with a delicious sense of horror. They believe the story. It confirms their own sense of moderation and good sense. They might lace, but they would never do that. The rumor serves a social purpose. It allows them to condemn the extreme vanity of others while feeling secure in their own, more rational level of conformity. You, however, feel a chill. You think back to the anatomical drawing of the corseted skeleton. The drawing showed ribs that were so bent and displaced that they might as well have been removed. The urban legend might be false in its literal details, but you realize it's true in spirit. Women weren't having their ribs surgically removed, but through the slow, steady, daily pressure of the corset, they were achieving a similar result. They were forcing their ribs out of the way, effectively making them disappear from the outside silhouette. The myth is a lurid fantasy, but the reality you now understand is a slow-motion, self-inflicted anatomical violence that is, in its own way, just as horrifying. No surgeon's knife was necessary. The hollowbone and steel, applied with enough time and pressure, could do the job just fine. You are now entering middle age. The world of frantic balls and flirtations has given way to a quieter life of managing a household and navigating the subtle, but fierce politics of high society. Your body too has changed. The wasp waist is a memory, replaced by the thicker, more matronly figure considered appropriate for your age. You still wear a corset. Of course, to go without would be unthinkable, like leaving the house without shoes, but it is a less aggressive, more supportive model. But your body has a long memory. The decades of constriction have left an indelible mark, and now in the quiet moments of your life, the bill is coming due. It starts with your back. You are in a constant state of dull, aching pain. You can't stand for too long without needing to sit. You can't sit for too long without needing to stand. You blame it on age, on the damp weather, on nerves. You visit your doctor. And he too dismisses it as a common complaint of women your age. But the real cause is the ghost of your former corset. For 20 years, the rigid structure of hollow bone and steel did the work that your own muscles were supposed to do. Your core muscles, the deep abdominal and spinal erector muscles that support your torso, were effectively unemployed. And like any unused muscle, they atrophied. They wasted away, becoming weak, thin, and useless. Now, even with a less constrictive corset, your own body lacks the strength to hold itself upright. Your skeleton is resting on a foundation of weakened, inadequate muscle. The chronic pain is the cry of a skeletal system that has been stripped of its natural support. This is the great paradox of the support the corset claimed to offer by providing external support. It destroyed the body's own internal support system, creating a lifelong dependency and chronic pain. But the back pain is just the beginning. The digestive issues that were once an occasional, mealtime annoyance have become a chronic condition. Years of your intestines being compressed and displaced have taken their toll on their ability to function. Your breathing, too, has never fully recovered. Even when unlaced, you tend to breathe shallowly, from the chest, a habit learned over decades and now ingrained in your muscle memory. You find yourself easily winded, and a flight of stairs can feel like climbing a mountain. And here we find a sad and often overlooked piece of the corset's legacy: the impact on bone density. Modern medicine understands the importance of weight-bearing exercise and deep breathing for maintaining strong bones. A lifetime of restricted movement and shallow breathing likely contributed to a higher incidence of osteoporosis and brittle bones in older women. While they wouldn't have had a name for it then, the dowager's humps and broken hips that were so common among elderly Victorian women were likely, in part, a long-term consequence of their youthful fashion choices. This brings us to a historical debate that is still very relevant: the intergenerational impact of corsetry. Some medical historians and sociologists argue that the damage wasn't just confined to the women who wore them. They suggest that a lifetime of compromised health, poor circulation, chronic organ dysfunction, weakened musculature may have affected their children. Did the daughters of heavily corseted mothers have lower birth weights or a higher incidence of childhood illnesses? This is incredibly difficult to prove definitively with the historical data available. Proponents of the theory point to the degeneracy and the declining health of the urban population, suggesting corsetry was a contributing factor. Opponents argue that it's impossible to isolate the effects of the corset from other factors like poor sanitation, diet, and infectious diseases. Was the corset a significant contributor to a decline in public health? Or was it a minor player in a much larger, more complex picture? The academic jury is still out, making it a fascinating what-if of medical history. You sit by the fire in the evening, your hand pressed to the small of your back. You are a respected woman, a pillar of your community. You have done everything that was ever expected of you, and you are in constant, nagging pain. You have, in essence, traded the vitality of your later years for the fashionable figure of your youth. The corset is no longer a physical object you wear. It is a ghost that haunts your muscles, but yet your bones are still paying. It is the slow, chronic, and irreversible legacy of a lifetime spent in a beautiful, suffocating cage. The real price of that tiny waste wasn't the money you paid to Madame Du Bois. It was your own future comfort, sold off one shallow breath at a time. The world is changing. The gas lamps in the streets are slowly being replaced by the harsh, brilliant glare of electric lights. The clatter of horses' hooves is now mingled with the chugging and sputtering of the first automobiles. It is the dawn of a new century, the Edwardian era, and fashion is changing with it. You look at the new fashion plates, and the ideal silhouette is different. The rigid, upright, hourglass figure that defined your youth is gone. In its place is something new, something strange, something called the S-curve or the S-bend. To achieve this new look, you need a new corset. You stand once again in a corsetier's fitting room, but the garment she brings you is an entirely different beast. This is the health corset or the straight front corset. It is long, extending far down over your hips, and the front busk is a single, completely rigid, straight piece of steel. You put it on, and the sensation is bizarrely different from your old corsets. The pressure on your abdomen is gone. In fact, This new corset is designed to be relatively loose around your stomach and waist. The rigid front bust forces your abdomen down and back, creating a flat front profile. The real pressure, the real shaping, is happening elsewhere. To compensate for the forward tilt of your hips caused by the straight front, the corset is cut to throw your bust forward and your hips backward. It forces your spine into a deeply unnatural sway-back position. You are no longer a perfect hourglass, you are a pouter pigeon. You are an S. This new posture feels incredibly strange. You feel like you are perpetually about to tip over. Your chest is pushed out, your shoulders are thrown back, and your rear is thrust out in a prominent curve that would have been considered deeply vulgar just a decade earlier. To walk, you have to adopt a new gait, a sort of elegant, gliding strut. This was the great and deeply ironic sales pitch of the S-bend corset. It was marketed as a healthier alternative. Because it didn't compress the abdomen, its proponents claimed it was better for the internal organs. They argued it was a more natural shape, freeing the wearer from the unhealthy waist constriction of the Victorian era. And here's the truly strange piece of trivia about this health corset. It was arguably even worse for the spine than its predecessor. The extreme sway-back posture it forced upon the wearer put immense strain on the lumbar vertebrae. While it may have given the organs a bit more room, it was a nightmare for skeletal alignment. Chronic back pain, already a common complaint, became an epidemic among fashionable Edwardian women. They had simply traded one form of anatomical tyranny for another. This leads to a fascinating historical debate. Was the S-bend corset a genuine, albeit misguided, attempt at a healthier design, driven by the arguments of the dress reform movement, or was it simply a clever marketing gimmick, a way for the corset industry to rebrand itself in the face of mounting medical criticism and sell a whole new generation of women a whole new product? You look at your reflection in the mirror. This new S-shape is supposed to be the height of elegance. It is the shape you see on the famous Gibson girls, the new ideal of womanhood. But you just feel contorted. Your body, which had finally settled into a sort of truce with the old hourglass corset, is now being forced into a whole new, uncomfortable geometry. The fashion has changed, but the fundamental principle has not. Your body is still an armature to be molded. The ideal has shifted, but the existence of an ideal, and the necessity of using an artificial device to achieve it, remains unquestioned. You have escaped the Victorian cage of the hourglass only to be locked into the Edwardian prison of the S-bend. It is a different kind of confinement, with different kind of pain, but it is confinement all the same. The architectural plans for your body have been redrafted, and you have no choice but to submit to the reconstruction. The world you know, a world of intricate social rules, of long, leisurely afternoons and glittering, predictable seasons, is about to end. The year is 1914. The headlines in the newspapers are growing darker, filled with talk of archduchess, ultimatums, and mobilizations. And then it happens. At first, it seems a distant thing, a matter for men in uniforms. But its effects arrive faster and more profoundly than anyone could have imagined. Your husband is away on war work. Your son has enlisted. And your life, like the lives of millions of women, is about to be transformed. There is a sudden, desperate shortage of labor. With the men gone to the front, women are called upon to fill their roles. You see it everywhere. Women are driving trams, working in munitions factories, tilling the fields. They are nurses at the front, volunteers at home, office workers keeping the bureaucracy of the nation running. The delicate, ornamental lady of leisure is an unaffordable luxury in a nation fighting for its survival. And in this new world of work and responsibility, the corset, the S-bend, the entire architecture of feminine restriction, suddenly seems not just frivolous, but absurdly impractical. How can you operate a lathe when you can't bend at the waist? How can you drive an ambulance when you can't, and you work a 12-hour shift in a factory when you're held in a rigid cage of steel and curule? The answer is you can't, and so almost overnight the corset begins to disappear. This wasn't a matter of fashion, it was a matter of national necessity. The government itself stepped in. In one of the most famous and impactful moments in the history of underwear, the U.S. War Industries Board in 1917 asked American women to stop buying corsets. Why? Because the metal was needed for the war effort. The steel used in corsets, they announced, could be used to build battleships. One estimate claimed that the liberated metal was enough to construct 2 of them. The corset was no longer just unhealthy or impractical, it was unpatriotic. This provides us with a fascinating and slightly amusing piece of historical trivia. For years, the dress reformers had argued on the grounds of health, and the feminists on the grounds of liberation. But what finally killed the corset wasn't a philosophical argument. It was a battleship. The pragmatic demands of total war succeeded where a century of debate had failed. You find yourself volunteering at a hospital, rolling bandages and writing letters for wounded soldiers. You work long hours on your feet, and for the first time in your adult life, you do it without a corset. You wear a girdle or a corselet, a softer, more flexible garment, made with elastic that offers a gentle, smoothing effect without the rigid boning. It is a revelation. You can bend. You can stretch. You can breathe. The chronic aches and pains that have been your constant companions for years begin to fade. You feel a sense of physical freedom that is so profound, it's almost disorienting. You feel capable, strong. This is the great, unresolved debate for historians of fashion and society. What truly killed the corset? Was it the long, slow erosion of its credibility by medical reformers and feminists? Was it the changing aesthetic ideals brought about by modern art and dance, or was it the sudden, cataclysmic shock of World War I? Some historians argue that the war was merely an accelerator, that the corset was already in its death throes by 1914 with softer, more natural styles already coming into vogue. They point to designers like Paul Poiret who were already creating looser, high-waisted gowns before the war. Others argue that without the war, the corset in some form would have lingered for decades. They contend that it was the war's radical redefinition of women's roles that made the corset culturally and practically obsolete in the space of just a few years. Was the war the cause of death, or did it just sign the death certificate for a patient that was already terminal? The argument neatly divides historians who believe in gradual cultural evolution versus those who believe in the power of great events to shape society. You look at the young nurses bustling around the hospital ward. They move with an energy and a purpose that your generation never could. They are wearing simple, practical uniforms. Their bodies are their own. They are defined not by the smallness of their waists, but by the importance of their work. The war is a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, a shadow falling over the entire world. But in the midst of the darkness, you feel a strange and deeply personal sense of liberation. The cage that has defined your entire life, the cage you inherited from your mother and almost passed down to your daughter, has been broken open. Not by choice, not by rebellion, but by the brute force of history. The war took the men, but it gave women back their bodies. The war ends. The world exhales a long, ragged, collective sigh. The men who survived come home, but they do not come home to the world they left. Everything has changed, and nothing has changed more than the women. You are in your drawing room, the same room where you once sat as a young girl, dreaming of a wasp waist. But the room feels different, bigger, or perhaps it is you who has changed. You are wearing a modern dress. It is loose, straight, and the hemline is a scandalous few inches above your ankles. Beneath it, you are wearing not a corset, not even a girdle, but a simple, soft brassiere and little else. The feeling is still, after all this time, slightly shocking. You catch your reflection in the mirror and for a moment you see a stranger. A woman who is shapeless. The familiar artificial curves are gone. You are just you. For years you associated the feeling of being uncorsted with the privacy of the bedroom, with illness, or with the brief, gasping relief at the end of a long day. Now, it is your public reality. You feel the ghost of the corset every day. It's in the way you instinctively try to sit rigidly upright, only to remember that you can now lean back. It's in the momentary panic when you need to bend over, a flicker of muscle memory bracing for the dig of steel that no longer exists. It's in the deep, unconscious breaths you sometimes find yourself taking, just for the sheer pleasure of it. Your body is free, but your mind is still learning the language of this new liberty. This psychological aftermath is a fascinating, and often overlooked, aspect of the corset's decline. For a generation of women, going without a corset felt like being undressed, exposed and vulnerable. They had been taught their entire lives that their natural bodies were unseemly, something to be molded and controlled. To suddenly present that natural body to the world required a profound mental shift. And here we find a strange little piece of social history, the slouch of the 1920 seconds flapper. The fashionable posture of the post-war era was a boyish, hip-slung slouch. It was the absolute antithesis of the rigid, upright posture of the corseted woman. It was a conscious, deliberate physical rejection of everything their mothers had stood for. It wasn't just a posturement, a declaration of modernity. They were a generation that refused to be caged. You watch your own daughter, now a young woman, getting ready to go out to a jazz club. She wears a short beaded dress that shimmies when she moves. She has bobbed her hair. She is all sharp, energetic angles. The idea of her wearing a corset is as absurd as the idea of her using a horse and buggy. It belongs to another world, a historical curiosity she might see in a museum. But was the liberation complete? This is a point of vigorous debate among historians and feminist scholars. On one hand, the abandonment of the corset was an undeniable physical emancipation. It freed women from pain, disease, and restriction. On the other hand, a new set of aesthetic demands immediately took its place. The ideal was no longer the curvaceous, wasp-waisted woman, but the slender, androgynous, boyish flapper, binding their chests and exercising obsessively to be thinner. Did women escape one prison only to enter another? Some historians argue that the flapper ideal was, in its own way, just as tyrannical. It replaced an instrument of constriction with a regimen of starvation. Others argue that this is too cynical. They contend that dieting and exercise, while potentially harmful if taken to extremes, at least involved the body's own agency, rather than an external, mechanical device. The debate continues to this day. Was the 1920 seconds a genuine liberation, or just a changing of the guard, a new body prison replacing the old one? You pick up an old photograph of yourself from before the war. You are in your late 20s, laced into a formidable S-bend gown, your body contorted into the perfect, fashionable shape. You remember the woman in the photograph. You remember the woman in the photograph. You remember her life, her thoughts, her pains. She seems like a different person from a different species. You are grateful for the freedom you now have, the simple comfort of an unbound body. But a small, strange part of you feels a flicker of something for the woman in the photo. Pity, yes, but also a strange sort of respect. You remember the discipline it took, the endurance, the quiet, daily fortitude. You were part of the last generation of women to live in the beautiful, terrible cage. You survived it. And now, standing in the quiet of your drawing room, you can finally, truly breathe. Decades have passed. The world has survived another war, entered an atomic age. It is now hurtling towards a new millennium. You are a ghost now, a whisper from a bygone era. Your world of hollowbone and steel seems as ancient and alien as a Roman toga. But is it? You drift through a modern department store, a place of dazzling lights and synthetic fabrics. You find yourself in the lingerie department, and you see them. They are not called corsets anymore. They are called shapewear, waist trainers, body shapers. They are made of nylon, spandex, and lycra, space-age materials that stretch and cling. They are seamless, soft, and breathable, but their purpose is eerily familiar. You see a young woman picking one up. It's a waist cincher, a wide band of high-compression elastic with a row of hooks and eyes. The advertisement next to it shows a celebrity with a dramatic, exaggerated hourglass figure, her waist photoshopped to an impossible thinness. The ad promises to sculpt your curves, flatten your tummy, and give you that coveted hourglass shape. The technology has changed, but the promise is identical. The pressure is still there, albeit applied by flexible polymers instead of inflexible bone. The goal is still to create a smooth, idealized silhouette, to mold the flesh into a more desirable shape. The ghost of the corset is alive and well, hiding in plain sight in the language of shaping and sculpting. This is the modern echo of your world. The direct line from the Victorian corset to today's multi-billion-dollar shapewear industry is undeniable. Kim Kardashian's waist trainer is the direct descendant of your spoon bust corset. The principle is the same: the belief that a woman's natural body is a problem to be solved, a raw material to be molded into a more fashionable form. And here we find a truly modern piece of trivia that connects directly back to your time, the waist training trend. In recent years, social media has been flooded with influencers promoting the daily wear of tight, corset-like devices to permanently reduce the size of the waist. They use the exact same language as the 19th century tight lacing journals training. Settling, seasoning the corset. They make the same dubious claims about long-term results. Medical professionals today issue the same warnings as their 19th century counterparts. It doesn't work permanently. It can restrict breathing, and it can harm your internal organs. The dialogue has remained virtually unchanged for 150 years. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most important, historical debate. Have we really made any progress on one level? The answer is obviously yes. Modern shapewear is not the instrument of torture that your corset was. It doesn't deform the skeleton or permanently displace organs. The health consequences are far less severe. Women are not fainting from lack of oxygen due to their Spanx. But on another, deeper level, the question is more complicated. The underlying ideology remains disturbingly similar. The idea that a woman's body must be altered to be acceptable, that beauty requires a degree of discomfort and restriction, is still powerfully present. The debate among cultural critics, historians, and feminists today is whether modern shapewear is a tool of empowerment or a tool of oppression. Some argue it's a choice. A woman can choose to wear it for a special occasion to feel more confident in her clothes. It's temporary, it's optional, and therefore it's a form of agency. Others argue that this choice is heavily influenced by a relentless media landscape that promotes an impossibly narrow and often digitally altered standard of beauty. They argue that the pressure to shape and smooth is just a softer, more insidious version of the same pressure you face. Is it truly a free choice when the culture constantly tells you that your natural body is not good enough? You watch the young woman by the waist cincher and place it in her shopping bag. She is both freer and more connected than you could ever have imagined. She can vote, work, and love whomever she chooses. She can also see thousands of images of perfect bodies on her phone every single day, a level of social pressure you were mercifully spared. The cage has become invisible, more comfortable, more flexible. It is no longer made of hollow bone and steel, but of pixels and social expectations. It is a prison you can, in theory, take off at any time. But the pressure to put it on, as you know better than anyone, is immense. The echo of your struggle is all around, a quiet, insistent whisper beneath the hum of the modern world. Let's leave the bright, noisy world of modern shapewear and return, for one last moment, to you. Not the symbol, not the medical case study, not the fashion victim or the historical artifact. Just you, a woman standing in her drawing room at the twilight of her life. The world has rushed on, leaving you and your memories behind. The children of their own who you can barely recognize. The corset lies in a chest in the attic, a strange relic of a forgotten age. Sometimes, on a quiet afternoon, you take it out. You run your fingers over the smooth, warm coveted, the faint outline of the baleen bones. It feels like an archaeological find, a piece of a lost civilization. You were more than just a body in a cage. This is the final, crucial point that history so often misses. To label you and your entire generation as simply victims is to strip you of your complexity, your humanity. You were a woman who navigated an incredibly restrictive world with the tools you were given. The corset was not just an instrument of oppression, it was your uniform. It was the armor you wore to face the world. It gave you the posture of confidence, even when you felt none. It was the key that unlocked doors to society, to marriage, to the only form of security a woman of your class could hope for. To have rejected it would not have been a simple act of freedom, it would have been an act of social suicide. You remember the camaraderie of the dressing room, the shared, intimate ritual of lacing. You remember the secret pride you felt when you saw your own elegant reflection in a ballroom mirror. You remember the subtle language of the laces, a little looser for a quiet day at home, a little tighter for a grand occasion. It was a language only women spoke, a shared experience that bonded you together. And here we touch upon the last, and perhaps most subtle, historical debate. By focusing so relentlessly on the physical damage and the oppression, do we sometimes forget to ask what the experience, who practice history from the senses, try to reconstruct this? They argue that to truly understand the past, we must try to understand not just what people did, but what they felt. What did the constant pressure feel like? Did it, after a time, become a comforting hug, a source of security, as some tight laces claimed? Did the rigid posture make you feel more dignified, more in control? This is a profoundly difficult question to answer, as it pushes against our modern understanding of comfort and freedom. We cannot easily comprehend how a restrictive garment could be perceived as anything other than painful. But to ignore that possibility is to impose our own values on the past. The scholarly argument is not that the corset was good, but that its lived experience was likely far more complex and psychologically nuanced than a simple narrative of victimhood allows. It was a prison, yes, but for many it was also home. You placed the corset back in its chest, the scent of lavender and old silk rising to meet you. You are not just the sum of your displaced organs or your deformed ribs. You were a wife, a mother, a friend. You navigated a world of immense constraints with grace and fortitude. You laughed, you loved, you worried, you hoped. You lived a full, complex life, not in spite of the cage, but within it. The story of the corset is not just a story of a piece of clothing. It is the story of the women who wore it. It is your story, and it is a story not just of constriction, but of a quiet, forgotten, and deeply human resilience. You were a prisoner of your time, but you were also its masterpiece. And that, in the end, is a truth far more complex and compelling than any simple tale of oppression. And now the story is over. The drawing room fades. The rustle of silk recedes, becoming just the soft hum of the fan in your own room. The ghost of the corset's pressure dissolves, leaving only the gentle weight of your blanket. Your own breathing is deep and slow, easy and full, a quiet luxury you barely notice. The journey is done, and you can rest. Imagine the feeling of unlacing, that slow, delicious release of pressure, spreading through your whole body now. Feel the tension in your shoulders and back begin to melt away, your muscles letting go of a tightness you didn't even realize you were holding. Each breath you take goes a little deeper, a little slower, washing over you like a warm, gentle tide. The outside world, with all its pressures and its shapes, is very far away now. Here, in this quiet space, there are no expectations. There is no ideal to live up to. There is only the simple, peaceful reality of your own comfortable resting form. You are drifting now, floating in that soft, quiet space between wake signals and sleep. The images of the past have softened, their sharp edges blurring into a gentle watercolor. The voices are gone, the history is settled. All that remains is the feeling of calm, a profound sense of peace settling deep into your bones. Your body is your own, your breath is your own, your rest is your own. Your rest is your own, and the night is here to hold you, safely and without constriction, until morning comes. The end of the article. Good night.